This is the Bob Cordaro Show on TV.
They fought for us, now he'll fight for you. The pursuit of justice and liberty. It's the Bob Cordaro Show on TV.
And now, Bob Cordaro.
Great good morning, everyone. Happy Sunday. My name is Bob Cordaro, and this is the Bob Cordaro Show on TV. I'm a native of this region, born, raised, and returned twice. As many of you may know, I do radio 5 days a week, 9 a.m. to noon on WILK. Appointment radio, we call it. And now we do this thing, the Bob Cordaro Show on TV, each and every week at 11:30 a.m. here on WNEP-TV 16. This show is devoted to the greatness of our area, northeastern and central Pennsylvania. So we accentuate the positive, talking to people who make this area great. We don't do that often enough. We also talk to people who have or want connections to this area. Is it cheerleading? Darn right it is, and we need more of it. Well, first today, we're joined in our regular health segment by Dr. Bryan Frantz, who is tops in his field of dentistry and a world-recognized periodontist. Open wide. Then, our Power Brunch Player of the Week is Mark Davis, a journalist whose credentials include a long stint, and where you might recognize him from, on WNEP-TV as a top newsman, covering area stories for decades, telling it like it was. I got to know Mark as a serious news guy while we worked together at WILK. I named him the Mad Dog because despite his calm, cerebral demeanor, I told audience members he was like a mad dog when he was chasing a story. From a time and a day when news was real, Mark Davis, our Power Brunch Player of the Week. So with the help of God, our families, and each other, let us begin.
Dr. Bryan Frantz is an internationally recognized periodontist. He heads a multi-specialty dental practice in Dunmore and has consulted, lectured, and taught around the world in his chosen field.
We left off last week talking with Dr. Linda Frantz, along with her husband, Dr. Bryan Frantz, about breast cancer and detection issues. Bryan?
And so, Linda, at the end of the show, we wanted to continue on the theme of prevention and early detection. And I know there was some additional testing that you wanted to go into. Talk to us a little bit about what we didn't cover last time.
Okay. If you remember, we did talk about mammogram and whole breast ultrasound. And the thing that we didn't get into was MRI.
Magnetic resonance imaging.
Yes.
And so tell us a little bit about the difference between an MRI and a mammogram.
Okay. Well, a mammogram, they're doing digital tomography to take a picture of the breast. An MRI is a nuclear magnetic image. There's no radiation involved with it. And we don't usually use that in a screening procedure, but we do use it in women who are at high risk of breast cancer, possibly in women who have a first-degree relative, who have very dense breasts, which we talked about before, that the mammogram and the ultrasound may not show it. And I have had women who had MRIs that picked up breast cancer that never showed.
Would you say that genetics is probably the biggest risk factor for a woman to get breast cancer?
It's probably not the biggest, but it is very important. And women who do have BRCA genes, they definitely need to have, many of them elect to have bilateral mastectomies.
What do they have? What do you have to do to determine the genetic factors? Is it just looking at your family, or is it much more?
It's a little bit more than that. So generally, family history is very important, especially if they have other cancers such as colon cancer, ovarian cancer in the family. Anyone with breast cancer at an early age usually has genetic testing. And then if the genetic testing does show the BRCA gene, then we know that we have to be vigilant because these women are at risk not only for breast cancer, ovarian cancer, colon cancer. So many of them elect to have bilateral mastectomies. They may have their preemptively. They may have their ovaries out, and they have to have regularly screening colonoscopies. And then, of course, their children or their siblings all need to be examined too.
So let's go back for a second, and a patient comes into your office, and they've been a patient of yours. You've identified them as a high risk patient, even at an early age, as you alluded to in the previous segment. What is your workup then as an internist? What do you do? How do you take them? What do you do from there?
Well, I always recommend the mammogram and then possibly the ultrasound and the MRI, but I also like them to see a breast surgeon. For people with a high risk, should see a breast surgeon and have a yearly examination. And
why is that?
Well,
I mean, to me, the surgery is what we're trying to avoid, but you're mentioning send them right to the surgeon.
Well, the surgery is the only way to get if we feel someone has an abnormal lesion, it's the only way to possibly get to cure. So it's good to have them involved with a breast surgeon and have examinations.
Analyzing or doing a procedure?
No, not doing a procedure. Analyzing, examining, overlooking the mammogram and the ultrasound, rechecking those pictures, make sure they were read correctly by the radiologist. And then most of them usually do an every 6 month test. So we'll do a mammogram and ultrasound, and then 6 months later do the MRI.
So if I'm identified as a high risk person, how often should I see my doctor, my internal medicine doctor?
I would say that you should probably be seen at least twice a year, depending on what other illnesses or comorbidities you may have.
I mentioned to Linda that this was not going to be an easy interview today, Bob, that we were going to really give her a hard time. So.
I'm used to that for years. You too.
That's right. She lives with me, so that's...
She's grilled by your patients. She can handle us. So, Linda, someone comes to you. Your focus of your practice is early detection of cancers. The family history is important. The 3 forms of testing you discussed are important. And after that, somebody finds out they've got breast cancer. What comes next?
Once we find out, well, first of all, they don't really find out right away. They find out they have an abnormality, which is staged according to how suspicious the lesions are. And then we have to move forward with a biopsy. And generally, either the biopsy can be done by the radiologist or the surgeon will have to do the biopsy. Sometimes they have to do what we call a needle localization biopsy. If the lesion is so small you can't palpate it or feel it, then they put a needle in under mammogram or ultrasound guidance, and then the surgeon can take a piece of the tissue out surrounding that. And once we get the biopsy and we get the pathology report, then we know where we need to go to further treat it if it is breast cancer. Not all biopsies come back cancerous.
So Linda, just very generally speaking, the staging. Can you talk to us? What does it mean? Staging 1 through 4? Is that how it's? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So staging, to do the staging, then we have to do the procedure first. So first we have to remove the cancer. Generally, most of the time we do a lumpectomy, and that's what we call a sentinel node biopsy. So they put dye in at the biopsy site, and they go to the lymph nodes, and they take out the first 1 or 2 several nodes and test them for cancer.
So again, hopefully early detection. We do see that there's a problem, and the first step is a lumpectomy, and read the histology, read what it is. And then what are the advantages then of early detection in terms of surgical intervention?
Well, early detection leads to smaller lesions. And the smaller the lesion, the less likely it is to metastasize. So we want to find these lesions or spread. We want to find the lesions before you can even palpate them. A couple millimeters, not centimeters. And once we find them early, then we could take care of them.
That's an interesting point, because actually I've always thought that you have to detect it, but you'd really... If someone's high risk, you can detect it with the imaging, with the testing you've suggested, without actually feeling anything.
Yes. You really don't feel a lump until it's about 1 centimeter, about half an inch. So we want to feel it before women should examine their breasts every month, but we want to get these breast cancers removed before you can actually palpate anything.
Worst case scenario, someone unfortunately has a higher stage, would you call it, like a stage 4 maybe? Okay. Has there been improvements in the surgical reconstruction, what have you, for patients that are faced with something like that?
Well, I mean, if someone is stage 4, we may not even recommend doing a lumpectomy. We might want to just or a mastectomy or removal of the breast. Just first go to chemotherapy and then sometimes go back in, or if women do have the lumpectomy, they have to have radiation
And
to the breast.
You know, you bring up another interesting point. How effective then are today's chemotherapeutic agents in, treating breast cancers? I know in my own practice, in fact, today I had a woman who we were screening, and she was taking a medication for, I think it was about 5 years after her reconstructive, her surgery. So how effective are those medications today?
The medications are very effective. When we do the biopsies, we test for receptors. So if a woman has estrogen and progesterone receptors, HER2/neu, there are a variety of receptors that we check for, that can predict how aggressive the cancer may be and how the treatments can affect it. So if they do have estrogen and progesterone receptors, the hormonal treatments such as Arimidex, tamoxifen, they work very well, and they're oral pills, not intravenous chemotherapy.
I do want to briefly mention that, the Arimidex, for example, that's a medication that you want to, if you're having any type of dental work done, especially any type of dental surgery, you want to mention to the treating surgeon, dental surgeon, that you've been on that medication because it can have some oral side effects as well.
Well, Linda, this is it's a big subject, and it's an important subject. We're so happy you tackled it with us, at least to give people some opening thoughts on it.
Absolutely.
Prevention, the cure; early detection, the key. And we appreciate you being with us, Dr. Linda Frantz.
Thank you, Bob. Great to be here.
And now, the Sunday Brunch Power Player of the Week on the Bob Cordaro Show.
Today's Power Brunch Player of the Week is Mark Davis. You know him from WNEP-TV and local news, and just a guy who's been a factor for a long time here in Northeast Pennsylvania and Central Pennsylvania. But I got to know him when we worked at WILK, and I said, this guy's top quality news guy. We're lucky to have had him. And he's retired now from WILK, and he's with us here. Mark Davis, welcome.
I'm just going to go polish my halo, Bob. You're grateful, but I'm grateful too. A little guy from Clark Summit got a job that he loved and got to do it for 45 years. And I sit back and say to my wife all the time, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I did this. But I was very fortunate to do what I love in my home area for a long time. And the listeners and the viewers took me into their homes every night. And it was just a great ride.
When I would have the opportunity just to listen to you and Frank Andrews talk to each other, and then when I had you side by side with David DeCosmo, doing the...
And we were all in the rocking chairs sitting around the...
doing Agnes and whatever we did.
Yep.
I just realized that Mark Davis, for a young guy, you are part of everybody's history. Maybe that's the greatest honor, to being such a constant presence and covering all those important events in a lot of people's lives.
Well, in the 8+ years that I worked at 16, so many big things happened. I covered George Banks from the beginning to the end. All those years. They sent me to Pittsburgh for 2 weeks to cover jury selection. In Pittsburgh, I did then satellite shots from a newsroom in Pittsburgh. Followed it start to finish, and was there when he was sentenced to death. Of course, that was commuted. But I covered that beginning to end. I covered, and you'll appreciate this, I covered Russell Bufalino. I covered his trial in New York City. Guess who the young and upcoming prosecutor was? An assistant U.S. attorney named Rudy Giuliani. Got to cover one of his early cases. And I'm doing live shots in front of the federal courthouse in New York City.
That's when, now there were great days with WNEP-TV. They would put the resources on a story.
Oh, absolutely.
And just cover the hell out of it, and it worked.
It worked because they were so powerful and they had so many viewers. And in the days before corporate leadership, we were owned by the Shelburne family. Tom Shelburne Sr., one of the greatest guys I've ever met, said, you need it, you get it. If you're going to enhance the product for the viewers, go ahead. His son, Tom Jr., was the same way. Mm-hmm. And we knew if we tried to do it our best, he would back us. And he did. And here's, I'll tell you about Tom Shelburne. When he sold the station to the New York Times for $44 million, he gave every one of the employees $1,000 for every year of service. Mm. There were guys walking out of there with $25,000 checks. He didn't have to do that. And he had a meeting with us and he broke down in tears and he said, I wouldn't have this if it wasn't for all of you. Yeah. That was the kind of ownership we had. New York Times was much different. And of course, corporate ownership now is much different.
I had a good relationship with Tom Shelburne. I just really admired him. I got to be with him on a few occasions. So let's go back though to you and your career. Tell us, how'd you get your start? How'd you get interested in?
I got my start with a childhood friend named Bill Longworth. Bill Longworth's father was the station manager at WEJL, and on weekends he had to go in and do some paperwork and some stuff. And Bill and I would go with him and we'd play in a production studio. I went in, played the dials, the microphones. I was hooked. That was it. It was like 7th grade, 6th grade. I never wanted to do anything else.
Isn't it? I always find it interesting. I mean, you have the voice, you have the demeanor, and you have the ability to put a story together innately. And somehow you knew that was where you wanted to go.
Because it never seemed like work. It was fun. The 5 years I worked at ILK was like getting paid to have fun in the afternoon for 5 or 6 hours. Yeah. Because when you do it as long as I have done it, and like when I worked with Frank and with you, it's just automatic. And you know what to do as soon as something happens. You know, you got to do this, 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 and this. It's not that way today. Yeah. It's not that way. And I feel like a little easier. You wouldn't want to watch a TV newscast with me. I yell at the TV all the time. It's just different.
So we got to see you and got to know you. You were Wilkes-Barre bureau chief for WNEP-TV. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the Buffalino trial. Mm-hmm. You mentioned George Banks. To you, what was the most significant story in terms of reach? And then what was the most interesting story?
The most, I don't want to say interesting. Unfortunately, a lot of the interesting stories were tragic stories. Yeah. From beginning to end, I covered the Ziemba murder trial. The 2 young kids that were killed in the house under construction in Old Forge, Joey Alicio. I was there when Ernie Priate did the closing arguments, one of the best closings you'll ever see, ever. He had the mattress. He had the pieces of wood from the inside of the house. It was masterful. That's the one that made an impression on me because it was we would go to Old Forge and send 3 or 4 crews a day when that case was just starting because they hadn't found the children yet. And it was like all the resources were there. It was just one of those stories that never, never left me. I'll never forget, about 3 o'clock in the morning, they're arraigning Alicio at the magistrate's office in Old Forge. And I know all Walter Carlson's there and all the other top state police officers. And as they're bringing him out following the arraignment, bang, bang, bang. And it's still on the tape, and it was shot by a friend of mine who was my photographer, Scott Dobson, and I went to high school together. We're on the ground, and you can hear me saying, don't stop shooting. Never thinking that people were thinking it was the shots coming from it. It was just because they shoved him in the back of that police car, hit the gas, and flew out of there. Somebody had set off an M80. And there were hundreds of people there, 3 o'clock in the morning. That was a big deal. Because they caught the alleged killer at that time. Yeah. But there's so many stories. I interviewed George Bush, the father. Never got a picture with him, never got an autograph because I was so focused on the questions I had to ask and everything I had to do. People say, you didn't, I said, he was very nice, very down to earth, great guy to talk to. But I was so focused on interviewing the President of the United States, I thought about nothing else.
That was at the airport?
That was at the airport when he came in for a visit. It was one of the times just after the primary. And he was doing, you know how they do it.
Yeah.
One in a row. Okay, you got 505, you got 510, you got 515, and they run right down the list. And he sat there, he said, oh, you want to talk about hunting and fishing and how the area was nice for that. Couldn't have been more down to earth.
Yeah.
And then when he passed away, they replayed the story I did with the president. And I had people and said, you interviewed the president? And of course, some of my nieces and nephews and my kids went, Dad, you were on TV? I got to do so much at a local station. And I wanted to stay local because about halfway through my tenure, I get a call from a news director in Florida. He said, we're here doing some good work up there. I've seen some of your work. We want to fly you down for an interview. Excuse me? He said, the ticket will be at the airport in the morning. I want you to fly down for the day. I'm getting flown to Tampa, Florida.
Market, right?
Tampa, Florida. Went down there on a Friday. Spent the whole day with two guys who later became network correspondents who were at Channel 10 in Tampa. Flew home. He called me Saturday morning with an offer. Turned it down. Sunday called me with another offer. Turned it down. Monday called me with two more offers. I turned it down. My wife and I decided, we hadn't had any children yet, that if we were going to raise our kids, we were going to raise them right here. Because our family was here, and family is what's important. And I never regretted turning that down. In fact, after that, Kathy Bellich, another reporter there, was hired 2 weeks later because she was this number 2 on the list. But I never regretted it. I never regretted not leaving this market. Because as I moved through my career and did all the media work and everything, and I got back into radio, I looked back on those 45 years and said, boy, you were a lucky son of a gun.
Yeah. Well, all right, so you're a WNEP TV reporter.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows you. They're used to seeing you. They're very comfortable with you. But you look at a different opportunity, a different direction.
I was offered the assistant director of media relations for Wilkes University, Wilkes College at the time. And I was at the point, my wife was pregnant with our first child, our daughter who's now 32. And I said, well, I want to be part of their lives. My dad was my Little League coach, my Cub Scout leader. I wanted to do that for my kids. Mm-hmm. And I said, I can't do that with this job. She was used to it. Back in those days, no cell phones. We had a pager. I got paged out of restaurants. I got paged out of movies. We'd be out anywhere. Up, gotta go, see ya. And I'd be gone for who knows how long. I'd get called out day, night, 3 o'clock in the morning, the phone would ring. I'd be up and I'd be gone for 12 hours. And I thought, I just can't be in my kids' lives if I'm not there.
What year is this?
1989. So I go to Wilkes. I'm at Wilkes.
But I remember, and I was away for a number of those years. Not in prison, in college, law school. I never remember a time when you were not on the air for WNEP. Is that strange? And I don't think I'm unique.
No, because what happens is 16 is so powerful and such a habitual channel that people watch every day, all day, that I was off the air for years, and I'd still once, twice, 3 times a week. Saw you on TV last night, because the impact is so large and the footprint is so big. It never stops. And even now, even with the gray hair and everything else, people still come up to me and say, you're the guy from TV. You used to be on TV, right? I've been off the air 35 years.
Well, that's another question I want to ask you, because you've had a renaissance. There's a Mark Davis renaissance.
Yes.
Because Channel 16 has wisely released their archives.
They have archives because
play a big part.
When the transition went from film to videotape, they would always have whoever was working the overnight desk sit down and log all the tapes of all the stories. So they literally have racks on the wall of all these 3/4-inch tapes of every day and every newscast all through the years. So they're now running them on their YouTube channel, and they're promoting them on the main channel. So I was telling you before we got started, I said, I have a renaissance. People are coming up to me and saying, I saw you on TV last night. Are you still back on TV? And these are stories from 1983, 84, 85. And they also do the Video Vault feature on the 7 o'clock news. And I've been on that a number of times.
Yeah.
But I've just been so fortunate. And that's why when I retired from ILK back in August, I sat down with my wife and I said, boy, oh boy, I've got no regrets. None. I'm glad what I did, how I did it, and where I did it.
Yeah.
And that's a good legacy to have.
What was the most important story, in your view, that you were able to cover and be part of? In journalism, from start to finish, radio to TV, back to radio.
The most important story, and there are two, and they affect tens of thousands of people. I thought geodiasis was a big deal until COVID hit. Frank and I were on together for 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, for more than 8-9 months. We took away the regular format and we just did calls and help. Because Frank and I are dinosaurs. We have Rolodexes. And I knew every United Way director. I knew who to call at Commission on Economic Opportunity. I knew the Red Cross. And we had all these people we needed the contact to say, if you're in this situation, do this. We knew the heads of the hospital groups and everything else. We knew where to go. And we would get a list of questions every day, and we'd have guests on to talk to those questions. When I retired from ILK, I got a card from a listener who said, in capital letters, "I'll never forget what you did for us during COVID."
Yeah.
That's a story I'll never forget.
Yeah.
Same thing with geodiasis, start to finish. It affected tens of thousands of people who had this little organism in the water, which could make you sick. And it revolutionized water filtration and the reservoir management and all that stuff. I got to cover that too, because that impacted people's everyday lives. Yes, George Banks was incredible to cover. Buffalino was incredible to cover. But they're hot news, breaking news type stuff.
Yeah.
The stuff that really matters, everybody's day in and day out lives, was the stuff that really mattered to me. And that's the secret of a good newscast. I had an old news director, Paul Stuber, who said, the best thing you can do is when people need to know something, they turn to you, meaning the station.
Yeah.
They can count on you to give you the information that they need when they need it. And he said, if you win that battle every day, you're doing your job.
Well, you did your job for many years. Mark Davis, thank you for sitting down with us.
Thank you.
All right, my pleasure, friend.
Your Sunday Brunch Power Player of the Week on The Bob Cordaro Show. Join us every week for the Sunday Brunch Power Player of the Week.
Well, that's all for this week. The Bob Cordaro Show on TV, we'll call it a day. But we'll be back next week, 11:30 a.m. on WNEP TV 16 for another edition of The Bob Cordaro Show on TV.
Thanks for being part of the program. You've got an appointment every Sunday morning at 11:30 right here on WNEP TV. The Bob Cordaro Show on TV.
They fought for us, now he'll fight for you. The pursuit of justice and liberty. It's the Bob Cordaro Show on TV.